For those of you that say you and the whole world stands with Ukraine, this is a conflict on the other side of the world that does not involve us.
Sometimes I wonder what these people would do if you just put a book in front of them. I see two main issues with this guy's point. Number one, thinking that because Putin right now is operating over there, it is not a problem with the United States, and so we just shouldn't get involved. I know you clearly just got out of the shower, but let me remind you that Putin's wars are all about expansion. The objective was expansion during the Second Chechen War. It was expansion during the Russo-Georgian War. It was expansion during the annexation of Crimea, and it's a war of expansion now that the Russian army is inside of Ukraine. But I also want to put your statement in a little bit of historical context, because remember that in 1939, before the GIs went over to Europe to liberate it and then came back as heroes with ticker tape parades and all that, before then, people just like that guy were demanding non-intervention by the United States, so much so that Congress passed the Neutrality Act of 1939. And back then, there were people way more influential than the guy in the bathrobe, just like Charles Lindbergh, who said that the United States should not intervene because the war was in Europe and it was caused by the British and the Jewish people. And people like Senator Nye from North Dakota, who was the architect of the Neutrality Act and said that the United States should not get involved because it was a war being pushed by financiers. And people like Joseph Kennedy Jr., who was US ambassador to the UK and said that the European war was just a matter for Europe to decide and that Hitler's expansionist desires should be met with diplomacy. Or Henry Ford, who was both an isolationist and a non-interventist, who actually published a piece that was anti-Semitic to convince people not to participate in the war. And then there was Father Coughlin, who had a huge radio audience in the United States, who admired the rulers of Italy and Germany, and was telling his audience that the war in Europe was being caused by the Jewish population there. Now, clearly, history looks upon these people with a different perspective and optic than they were looked at back at the time. And it's hard for many, especially the poorly educated, who don't know much about history and also pretend to be experts in geopolitics, in economics, and even in contagious diseases. It's hard for these people to project what might happen 10 or 15 years from now. Remember, 80 years later, people like this one, who back then had an entire audience nationwide of admirers, of people that listened to their opinion and actually agreed with them, well, they're now considered, let's say it, assholes. So my question to you is, do you really want to be the guy that went down in history as saying,
This is a conflict on the other side of the world that does not involve us.
my suggestion is, don't be that guy.